Hi everybody, this is Kelly Hernandez and I am going to be showing you guys the first Cinderella book that I picked to review. Um, I wanted to talk about first, when I started doing the Cinderella research assignment, I kind of became really interested in um, a lot of the older Cinderella stories, meaning not just older in terms of the last couple hundred years, but um, more of the past several thousand years, meaning like the ones even like BC and stuff. Um, I had no idea personally that the Cinderella story stretched back that far. Um, I always kind of knew it as the classic story and not some of the stories that took place before the version that more familiar with. Um, so I decided to kind of focus on some of those stories from other countries and cultures that we're a little less familiar with. So that's why I picked the stories that I did. So, in keeping with that, the first book I want to show you is called The Persian Cinderella, which is by Shirley, I think it's Shirley Climo, and illustrated by Robert Florzak. Um, this story, there are quite a few differences from the classic Cinderella we're used to. So I'll probably go into it in quite a bit of detail because it's going to be a lot different from like Disney Cinderella and classic Cinderella books, storybooks from like what we're used to as kids. So basically, in the beginning, we are introduced to uh, I had to look it up. I wasn't sure how to pronounce it, so I actually had to Google it basically. But we meet a maiden named Setare, which her name in Persian means, or Farsi rather, sorry, her name means star, and it was given to her when she was born because of a star-shaped birthmark she has on her left cheek. And so, um, which you can kind of see. They actually have that in the illustration. Um, it's hard to see that it's a star, but she has a little birthmark on her cheek there. And the story goes on to talk about how she loses her mother right after she's born. I don't know if her mother dies in childbirth, it doesn't specifically say, but she loses her mother right away. And she lives with, in this story, it's not just a stepmother and two stepsisters, although she does live with a stepmother and her two stepsisters and her father. She also lives with three aunts, four female cousins, and the women's part of the house. You've got to keep in mind that this is in Persia, so they live in a women's part of the house, and it says she's often lonely. It says that she seldom sees her father because he's busy doing men's things. So she lives a pretty lonely life, and no one really pays attention to her. And um, she wears her stepsister's hand-me-downs, and she eats their leftover food, and she's pretty much just lonely all the time. So, um, but I wanted to kind of point out one of the things I noticed here with it's talking about in the introduction with the setting. It says, oh, and sorry, I'm kind of jumping around here. As far as the setting goes, at the very beginning it says, long ago when Persia was a land of princes and poets, there lived a maiden named Satare. So it says long ago. It doesn't say a specific time period, but I actually took it upon myself to look it up. And the story of Satare is actually supposed to be set in 15th century Persia. So it's quite an old story. So, but you can see they're talking about a land of princes and poets. And sorry, my phone keeps going off. Um, so we've got the castles and everything, but they're quite different from the castles that we're used to in our modern day Cinderella stories. They're, of course, like Middle Eastern castles. but you still get some of the same like purplish hues, you know, which still represent royalty and everything. So you still get a lot of the same colors for the castles and everything. Um, One thing I thought was worth noting, as far as cultures go, when we introduce Satari over here in the picture, um, it's talking about how beautiful she is, and they talk about, you know, of course, this being a different culture, they talk about her dark eyes and her long black hair, which gleamed like polished ebony. So, of course, in our modern day Cinderella stories, you have Cinderella with her blue eyes and her blonde hair, which is what we're used to. But here in this Persian Cinderella story, she's referred to as being absolutely beautiful, but she's got her dark eyes and her long black hair. So it's a stark difference um, from our Cinderella stories that we're used to. But again, in keeping with what we're used to for our Cinderella stories, she was very delicate with slender ankles and tiny feet. So some things never change. um, and then, so the next page goes on to talk about she has her two stepsisters, Layla and Nahid, who would torment her. That part is kind of in keeping with, well, I don't want to say in keeping since this one came before our Cinderella story, but the two stepsisters who torment her, and they make fun of her birthmark and tell her that it's dirty, and they'll always make fun of her, and she'll run off to try and wash off her star-shaped birthmark in the mud puddle, and she can never get it to wash off, of course, because it's a birthmark, but she's always embarrassed by that, which um, that'll be something to keep in mind for later in the story, how she's kind of embarrassed about that birthmark. But there's a shot of her stepsisters, and you've got one of her stepsisters here, of course, that, again, notably, like some of the other Cinderella stories we've seen, is dressed in green, which represents envy. So it's kind of funny how even in a different culture, we kind of have that same thing, the stepsister dressed in green for envy. And then on the next page, we have Satare's father, who's coming to visit all the women in the women's quarters. And what's happening is they're getting ready to have a big, um, it's essentially the royal new year for Persia, and it's called Nowruz, I think is how it's pronounced. And he's bringing them all a gold coin so that they can go and buy cloth to make new clothes to prepare for this big event. And so it shows her father for the first time, and it shows him giving her a coin, but you can see her father there in the book, and just like, again, some of our other stories, it has him in red, which represents power. So that is in keeping with some of our other stories. So a lot of the colors kind of represent the same types of things we've seen in some of our other Cinderella stories. So there are some similarities, even though there are some differences as well. So then all the women go down to the bazaar so that they can go buy cloth to go make new clothes for this big New Year event, where they're going to be able to meet the prince. I guess that's an important fact to point out. They're all gonna be able to meet the prince. So they go down there, and they have all the shops with all the animals and people, and all these. It talks about all the bright colors and caravans and all the smells and just different things, you know, things that they've never really experienced because they've spent all this time in the women's quarters, and so it's kind of all bright and new and exciting for them. So this page is kind of cool just because you can see all the bright colors, and it's kind of fun just because it's it's kind of that first experience, that first trip to the shopping center for these women. And you can see all those bright colors that they're experiencing for the first time. Um, but here's where the story takes quite a different turn from the Cinderella that we know. Um, so, like I said, they are there to buy clothes. So, Satare has a gold coin, just like all the women have a gold coin to buy clothes for this ball. And she sees, she's smelling all these new exciting smells. Well, one of the things she smells is toasted almonds, and she sees this peddler that's stirring these almonds, and she thinks they smell so delicious that she just has to have some. So there's no picture of this, so I just have to tell you about this part. Um, so she smells them, and they smell so wonderful that she decides she has to have them. So she goes over and she can't resist, and she uses part of her gold coin to buy these almonds. And she gets the almonds, and then she gets some change. And then as she's walking on further into the market, she sees an old woman. That part's actually in the picture. You can see the little old woman there who is begging for change, and she has these tattered clothes on, and Satare determines that the woman actually needs the money more than she does, and so she throws a couple of her leftover coins into the woman's pot there, and so all she has left is a couple of coins at that point, and it's no longer enough to buy cloth. So she decides she has just enough left to buy a new sash, and she's like, well, that's, that'll be fine. I'll just buy a new sash for the ball. Well, then, as she's heading to buy a new sash, she walks by this pottery stall, and she sees this little tiny blue pot with a crack in it. But she decides it's the brightest, bluest, most beautiful pot she's ever seen in her life, even though it has a crack in it and it's far from perfect. She decides it's absolutely beautiful and she has to have it. And she asks the man at the pottery stall how much it is, and he agrees to sell it to her for her last 3 remaining coins that she has, and shows a picture of it there. This beautiful little blue pot that she just has to have. So, so basically what happens in this story is she spends all her money. So when she gets home, her stepsisters are shocked. I'm going to read this little passage because it says her stepsisters could not believe what Satare had bought with her money. A leaky old pot, squealed Nahid. Now you'll have nothing new to wear for no ruse, Layla scolded. That's unlucky. You will disgrace us. Then I shall not go to Prince Merdad's festival, Satare retorted. But she feared she had not chosen wisely. No ruse was only 8 days away. I thought that was interesting, because in the Cinderella story that we're familiar with, it's always Cinderella is the sweet, unwitting maiden who, through no fault of her own, is kept from attending the ball because of her evil stepsisters and her stepmother. And she does everything right, and they basically prevent her from going to the ball because they rip her dress to shreds and give her too many chores to do, and they keep her from going to the ball and keep her from being happy. Of course, she manages to go with the help from her fairy godmother and everything. But in this story, it's actually through Satare's own fault because she spends all of her money and doesn't have anything to wear. And then her stepsisters actually even talk about her being a disgrace, which I think is interesting for the culture because that she would be a disgrace, which says something about the women in the Persian culture, especially at that time, that she would be a disgrace to them for not having the money and not spending it, not choosing wisely and spending the money to get new clothes to go impress the prince. It was kind of um, an interesting way that the story went for me. So I just thought it was quite a bit different from the traditional Cinderella story. So, um, but then it goes on to talk about when the new year comes along, and so everyone's getting ready for the ball by getting their clothes ready, and Satare is sitting alone in the garden with her little blue jug, and then she's basically talking to her jug, and she's rubbing the little pot, and then she says out loud, "I wish you were filled with jasmine blossoms." And all of a sudden the jug begins to quiver, and she feels her fingertips tingling, and all of a sudden she can smell um, the jasmine in the air, and she sees that her little jug is filled with the white flowers of jasmine, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, it's magic!" And um, so she thinks, "Oh my gosh, maybe there's a fairy in here." So she tries again, and she's like, "Please, little jug, I'm hungry." And then this basket of figs and apricots appears in front of her, and she decides to try it again, and she says, "Please, little jug." She's like, "I'm cold." And the jug wraps her with this shawl that's made out of goat hair, and the last thing she asks for is, she says she's lonely, and it has a dove appear and come down from a tree and show up on her shoulder. So one by one she wishes for all these things, and all these things happen for her. Try and get it so you can see all these things. There's the fruits that all appear for her, and the purple shawl, which purple, I don't know if that's an indication already of her, her getting ready to rise to royalty. That might be a clue of what's to come. And of course, she's got the blue jug right there, and then there's the dove getting ready to come down. So, but she decides then not to wish for anything else because she doesn't want anyone to see and know that she's got this magic jug. So anyway, the night comes for the ball, and everyone's getting ready. We have her stepsisters here who've gotten ready, and lo and behold, again, we've got one stepsister dressed in green, so we've got some more green for envy. And then we have another one that's draped in purple, so hopefully trying to become royalty right there. And then they're all getting ready to leave with or leave without Satare, rather. And after they leave, Satare decides to go ahead and pull out her little pot and make a wish, and she asks for a new gown to wear to the ball, and or to the I keep calling it a ball, but it's no ruse, it's the new year. And the jug makes her wish come true, and this is the new outfit. And as you see, trying to get it so I can see at the same time. Clearly, big cultural difference here. That is a huge difference from our Cinderella in the white, pure wedding dress that we're used to. We've got the gown with the head covering, very modest dressed here. And then the colors, there's lots of reds and purples. Um, and then one big thing that'll come up later in the story is two small diamond studded anklets that are on her ankles. So instead of glass slippers or golden slippers like in some of the stories, she has diamond studded anklets. So then next we have them getting ready to go to the palace, or her getting ready to go to the palace. So she climbs the marble staircase and gets ready to go into the palace there. So then it shows the palace at nighttime. The lighting doesn't look the best on my laptop, but there's more of those purple hues that represent royalty. And then I like all the nice light or bright yellows coming out of the window, which show that it's like a nice, happy, big event coming. You can tell that there's a lot of energy coming from inside the building. They have a lot going on in there. Then when she is in the palace, she sees, it says, a handsome youth stared boldly back at her, smiled, and stroked his beard. She clutched her scarf to her face and fled through the arcade on her left. So she sees this handsome man, and she doesn't know who he is, and she runs off because, she's shy. But she thinks he's very handsome. She has no idea who he is, but that'll come back later in the story, too. And this handsome man there. And I think it's worth noting the gold on his belt as well. And next we have kind of a general overview of the evening. There's a lot of dancing and big feasts and just a big party, just a really good time, and music, all sorts of stuff going on, snake charmers, knife throwing, just a whole bunch of entertainment for the night. And so it talks about all this fun they have, and then when the night is over, Satare is really disappointed, and she thinks that the night just flew by, and she wishes it had never had to end. But then she has to hurry home because she knows if her stepmother gets home and finds her bed empty that she's going to be in trouble. So it shows her hurrying home in the middle of the night, and she's got her gown on still. So there's nothing in this version about a spell being broken or her losing her gown or anything at midnight, nothing like that. She just has to get home before it's discovered that she's missing. So she still has all of her well, I say she has all of her gowns. That is not true. She in her hurry to leave, one of her diamond anklets actually slips off of her ankle, and she loses it in the canal. So then on the next page, it shows this stable boy, and he finds when his horse is getting a drink in the canal, the stable boy finds the diamond anklet in the canal and decides he must give it to his master, who happens to be the prince. And so you can see the stable boy, his clothes are starkly different from the royalty in the book. He's got kind of these subdued colors of clothes. And of course, no white horse for him. So, but he says he must get it to his master, and then it says in there that the prince says, "A tiny treasure," Prince Merdad declared, dangling the bangle from his finger. "I must find the one who wore it." And so his mother says that, "What do you know of women and their ways? I myself will find the owner of that anklet." So I think that's kind of another interesting thing about culture differences, is that in this story, instead of the prince being the one to go out and find the woman who fits the shoe, or in this case, the woman who fits the anklet, it's actually the prince's mother, or the queen, that goes out to try and hunt down the woman who fits this anklet. So the queen goes out to try and find the woman who fits this anklet, and has all the women in the city try and fit on this diamond anklet, and it's the same or similar as the glass slipper in a lot of the other Cinderella stories, where none of the women can get the anklet around their foot, or past their foot onto their ankle. It says in the story even that the stepsisters try and oil up their foot to get it on, and they still can't get it on their foot. And it shows these sisters, again, one of the sisters wearing green, trying to get this anklet over their foot, and neither one of them being able to get it on. And then, as he's getting ready, or as the queen is getting ready to leave, Sitare comes out, and she, in this case, is wearing the same gown that she wore to the no ruse, and she comes out wearing the matching anklet and asks if she can try it on, and of course she's able to put the anklet right on, and the queen says, come with me and I'm going to take you to the palace. And so Sitare goes with her and goes to the palace. And so from this point on, you would think they lived happily ever after, but the story doesn't actually end there. This is where it takes another twist away from our typical Cinderella. So the stepsisters, on the way out the door, they ask her how she managed to do it, and she tells them that there's a pari in my jug, which is a Farsi word for fairy. So she basically explains how she did this whole thing, that she had magic, and that's how she was able to accomplish everything. And so I'm going to take a quick moment just to read this part on the next page. So the queen says on the next page, the queen gave Sitare a mirror so that she might gaze at the prince's reflection without the embarrassment of facing him. I kind of hate this part. So another huge culture difference, culture shock for us. So like I just said, the queen gave her a mirror so that she could look at him without the embarrassment of facing him, because in this culture, and especially even more so at this time in history, it would have been a big deal for the woman to look directly at the man. So she would have had to have used a mirror just to gaze at her new future husband, which is just insane to think about, but still happens. So like I said, another huge culture shock. So but oh yeah, I said I wanted you to remember the star-shaped birthmark and how she was embarrassed about it earlier in the story. So when she looks in the mirror and sees him, she catches her breath because she recognizes the man from earlier when she saw him in the castle. She realizes that it was the prince that she had seen, and he looks at her and sees the star birthmark on her face, and he says Sitare because it means star, and she gets embarrassed and covers her cheek because she doesn't like the birthmark, and he says, no, your mark is heaven sent, the stars foretell that we shall marry. And it says she kneels and touches her head to the ground and looks up and said, you honor me. Another thing I don't love, but it is what it is. So it goes on, and they start planning the wedding. It's for they celebrate for 40 days. It's a whole thing. But the next kind of big thing is her sisters get sick and tired of all the celebration, and her sisters decide to they want to try and basically take over. So they decide to try and find her little jug and see if there's a way to get rid of her. So what they do is find the jug and basically make a wish that they want to be able to get rid of Sitare. And so what happens is the jug shatters into bits and pieces, and all that's left are these 6 jeweled hairpins. And again, I think it's noticeable that one of the stepsisters is all in green, so green with envy. You can see the hairpins down there. So then it shows the sisters on the next page doing her hair. They offer to do her hair for her wedding. And so it talks about how they do her hair, and they say that they want to pin it up for her. And when they start poking it in, she says ouch, because they poke her with it. And they keep poking the hairpins in, and one by one they're poking them in, and she's saying ouch. And then as they poke the last hairpin in, she vanishes, and in her place, all that's left is a dove. And the dove flies out the palace window and disappears. So basically, she turns into this dove and disappears. And the prince is sad. You know, he goes into this deep depression, and he won't talk to anyone, and won't eat, and won't see anyone. And it says that um, the only one, they're um, the only company he has is this dove that shows up at his window, and that's the only company he'll keep, is this dove that he falls in love with. And he finally gets the dove to let him pet it, and whenever he does, he realizes that the dove has these bumps on it. And when he gets close enough, he's finally able to realize that these bumps are hairpins stuck in the dove. And one by one, he starts pulling these doves, or these hairpins, out of the dove. And as he pulls the last hairpin out, all of a sudden, the dove changes from a dove back into Sitare. So at this point, the prince has his beautiful bride back, and now they are able to get married and live happily ever after. So, sorry, I feel like I went kind of quickly towards the end. I realized my video was getting kind of long. I just thought it was such an interesting story, so there was so much I wanted to show of it. And then on this last page, as you can see, you know, with them getting married, it has him, I think it looks blue in the video, but he's wearing purple. So again, we have that royalty thing going on. They both have the crowns on, and the gold trim, and they have their jewels and everything. So, and a final note about the stepsisters, it does say they go on to be so jealous that they puffed up until they were so filled with rage that their hearts simply burst. So, a little dark ending for you. Anyway, really interesting story. I just thought it was fun to read something that was completely different from the Cinderella that we're used to. So I hope you guys liked that. Hopefully this wasn't too long and boring for everybody. And maybe you guys will check that out just as an alternate to our usual happy, cheery Cinderella Disney stories that we're used to. So thank you guys so much for watching.